Have you ever seen a person that's possessed? If you have, I guarantee you it's something that you will never forget. My name is JD.goding, and this is Understanding the Bible. The purpose of this channel is to take small amounts of text, maybe that goes overlooked, and just simply mine the gold out of it. Because my goal is that you and your relationship with Jesus would only improve. Now, if you've ever had an experience like I'm talking about, leave it in the comments below. Who knows? Your comment may actually help someone. And if you'd smash that subscribe button, I'd really appreciate it. It just helps get the message out there. Several years ago, I was in Haiti with a buddy of mine, and we were doing disaster relief from the earthquake that had taken place. We were staying in a church, and we were having just simple conversation with the church pastor. And over that conversation, we learned that one of his church members was a former voodoo priest. The first question that came to mind for me was, can we talk to this guy? And of course, the pastor said, sure. So the next day, the guy came and we started chatting. I asked him, of all the things you could have done, why did you get into voodoo? And he told me that there was a lot of money to be made in being a voodoo priest. And so I said, what did it take to become one of these guys? And he said, well, I had to pay a lot of money, and then I had a higher voodoo priest pray a demon into me. Now, this might sound strange, and I will admit that I'm not an expert on the occult. This is just this story. He said after that he thrashed around on the floor for hours because the demon had taken over his body. He was then able to do things that just aren't normal. One of those things was people would come to him with people that they've had disagreements with or people they didn't like, and they would want a curse put on them. And so he would. And as he would put the curse on them, those people would literally die. Now, he told me many other things that he was able to do, but the question that really got me was, why did you end up turning to Jesus? And the answer I got, I'll let you know at the end of the video. Now, going into this story, you need to know a couple things on the background in order to make this story hit even harder. Up to this point, Jesus had been running a ministry that was going absolutely crazy. Thousands of people were coming from literally all over Israel to see Jesus. There were so many people that were coming to Jesus that his own family was saying that he's out of his mind. And the reason he was saying that was they were afraid the Roman government was going to come down and bring the heavy. What I mean is stomp the guts out of everybody in Israel because of the possibility that they were committing insurrection. Now, in the middle of that, it says that the disciples didn't even have time to eat. So the disciples were hungry, they were tired, it was the end of the day, and then Jesus said, let's go to the other side. The other side was a place that the disciples never wanted to go because it was filled with Gentiles. And there was a lot of racism between Gentiles and Jews in those days. And so they get in the boat and they proceed to go to the other side. And then in the middle of the Sea of Galilee, while they're making their voyage at night, it's dark, a huge storm erupts, like 20-foot swells. And the disciples are looking for Jesus, and he's in the back of the boat sleeping. They wake him up and they say, do you not care that we're perishing? Now, they say that to him, and this is coming at him in a very wrong attitude, but Jesus stands up, he wipes the sleep from his eyes, and he says, peace, be still. And then instantly, the water and the wind completely stop. The waves stop, the wind stops, and the guys in the boat think, who is this? And the fear of God completely fell on them. So this is the background. The disciples are at their wits' end. They're tired. They're following Jesus. And there's also a hit out on Jesus because the Herodians and the Pharisees have come together in a way where they want to destroy Jesus. There's all of these things that are building up to just make a lot of pressure on the disciples. So when the boat finally comes to shore is where we pick up. And this is what it says. They came to the other side of the sea, of the country of the Gerasenes, and when Jesus had stepped out of the boat, immediately there met him there out of the tombs a man with an unclean spirit. Now notice that it says Jesus stepped out of the boat. It doesn't say the disciples stepped out of the boat because the disciples are scared to death. Their internal RPM is pegged high. These guys are scared to death. This man would have been running towards Jesus. We're going to find out soon that he was bloody, he was naked, he was screaming, he was filled with demons. This would have been an absolute terrifying scene to take in. Now, this says that he's coming from the tombs, and in the tombs are these little ossuaries, which are like little rooms where you could come to either put someone into the tomb or you could come and pay respects to the dead. This is where this man has been living for what we know is a long time. The next thing it says is he lived among the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had been bound with shackles and chains, but he wrenched the chains apart and he broke the shackles in pieces. No one had the strength to subdue him. Now, this guy had been banished to the tombs because he was a menace to society. You can see this because he has been incarcerated. He's been in chains. He's been in shackles. Think handcuffs and leg irons. But every time he's put into these things, he has the power to break them apart. So what's a group of people to do? This guy is simply too strong for anybody in that community. So they banish him to the tombs, and this is where this guy is forced to stay and live a horrible existence. Night and day among the tombs and the mountains, he was always crying out and cutting himself with stones. And when he saw Jesus from afar, he ran and fell down before him. I want you to understand this horrible existence this guy is living in. He had been in his own community, and what he did was cause chaos. So much chaos that they actually incarcerated him and then banished him from the community. But now those demons, instead of working on the community, were working on this man. A question you can ask yourself, was this man actually cutting himself on his own, or was he under the power at this point of the demons to do this to himself? It's a good question to ask, and I don't necessarily have an answer. But what we do know is the term cutting himself means to smashing and hacking himself with stones. So this guy would have been a bloodied, scarred mess. This would have been someone that looks absolutely terrifying and awful. This is someone you'd never want to be around, right? I mean, this is someone that is legit scary, and yet this is the guy that runs up to Jesus. Now, the text says when he saw Jesus, he ran and fell down. And what it's talking about there is it's talking literally about the man himself. At some point, the man figures out that it is Jesus coming ashore. How does this happen? Well, here's my guess. The man doesn't know who Jesus is. Nobody knows who Jesus is. Everybody's clueless to who Jesus is when Jesus first introduces himself. But every time Jesus walks into a room and there's a demon present, the demon knows exactly who Jesus is. So I think the demons know that Jesus is coming across the Sea of Galilee. They know that he's getting out of the boat. And this internal dialogue that this poor guy is dealing with, he hears this and understands it and realizes this is my only shot at freedom. And he does the only thing he can do. He runs to the Lord. And that was the only action required of him for Jesus to step in and do the rest. And this is true for us today when we came to the Lord. Like, life was a mess. We could not figure it out. Maybe we had demons inside of us, and all we had to do was just turn to Jesus. When you turn to him, that's the action that's required, and then Jesus does the rest. This is the amazing thing about being a Christian. Jesus is able to take care of the problems that we aren't. And this is the example that we see in the scripture. But here in verse 7, you're going to see a change. And it says, and crying out with a loud voice, he says, what have you to do with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? I adjure you by God, do not torment me. For he was saying, come out of the man, you unclean spirit. Now see, the man was able to get to Jesus, but as soon as he got to Jesus, the demons took over. And there's an interesting dialogue that takes place between Jesus and the demons. Now, whenever you're confronted by a demon, what you're going to realize is they're extremely arrogant and they're stupid. Okay, that's the only way to put it. And this story plays it out. Because when the demons come into contact with Jesus, they actually start begging Jesus for mercy. They come at Jesus with this violent and screaming voice, and it's like, hey guys, how did you think this was going to go when you come into contact with literally the King of Kings? Their stupidity is just legendary. The other thing I want you to look at is around the word torment. There is real power in the spiritual world, and there's real authority. Now, demons are stronger than people, but Jesus is stronger than everything, which is something you have to keep in mind when you're coming into contact with something of this nature. In the next verse, Jesus actually goes on the offensive, and he says, and Jesus asked him, what is your name? And he replied, my name is Legion, for we are many. And he begged him earnestly not to send them out of the country. This is an offensive question because knowing someone's name, especially in that culture, showed power over someone. So Jesus, by asking the question, what is your name? He's actually saying, I have power over you. And what you also want to see, and this is a really small detail, but it starts in the singular and it ends in the many. What do I mean by that? He says, my name is Legion, for we are many. So this shows you that even when the demon is talking to Jesus, he's trying to lie, he's trying to deceive, he's trying to get out of it. And this is what demons do. They steal, kill, and destroy. That's their only mission. What's also funny here is the demon is using Roman terminology. What do I mean by that? A legion was a unit of Roman troops that numbered about 6,000. It was a huge amount of troops. And it was commanded by a ranking officer called a Legulus Augusti. And this man would have been appointed by the emperor. Now, what you see in the story is this man is inhabited by thousands of demons. And if he's using the word legion, he's using Roman terminology, which means that there's by default a leader, and that this demon leader would be appointed by Satan himself. So he's trying to seem all big, puffed up, and powerful, but then this legion of demons is just cowering in front of Jesus as he steps off the boat on a beach. You just see them shrink back in their powerless ability to do anything. The demons don't move because Jesus hasn't said to, which shows that Jesus has complete control over the situation. And now it says in verse 11, now a great herd of pigs was feeding there on the hillside, and they begged him, saying, send us into the pigs, let us enter them. Why pigs? Why would the demons want to go into pigs? Well, ultimately, the demons want to kill, steal, and destroy. And if they're given the ability to inhabit anything, they're going to take advantage of that. Now, you have to ask the question, why the pigs? Well, first of all, the pigs were sitting there. And the second thing is the demons want to kill, steal, and destroy something, and they want to get away from Jesus. What this is this is the ask. They want to go into pigs. Now, pigs are unclean animals, especially to the Jews. To the Gentiles, they're just another food source. And what's interesting about this story is normally herds of pigs are about 150 to 300. So to have a 2,000 head herd of pigs is an extremely large amount of pigs. It would also be meat used in the idolatrous worship of their false gods. And Jesus' response is pretty simple. It says, "So he gave them permission, and the unclean spirits came out and entered the pigs, and the herd, numbering about 2,000, and they rushed down into the steep bank into the sea and drowned into the sea." Now, it's really important to see that Jesus gave permission to these demons to go into the pigs. And you might ask yourself, well, why did Jesus not just send them into the pit? Like, why didn't Jesus just cast these demons into hell? And what it seems like is that there's a timeline for everything. We know that in Revelation 20, verse 10, it says that Satan, and by definition, all of his demons, will be thrown into the lake of fire. So there's coming a day when the demonic will be taken care of, but this day was not that day. So we're on Jesus' timeline. And these demons were not allowed to move until Jesus gave them a direction. And Jesus did. He sent them into the pigs. And this reveals to the disciples and to whoever else was present that it was only at the command of this man Jesus that the demons moved. And when they moved fast and they moved hard. So of course, this would be a huge problem because 2,000 pigs is the main food source, the main source for the idolatry, the stuff we talked about. And so this gets the attention of literally everybody in that area. This is the brilliance of Jesus. Jesus is not anti-animal. And I know this seems like a cruel thing to do, but remember, Jesus is the one who created animals. When he creates the animals, he says they're good. But the thing that you want to see here is that in comparison, a person is always way more valuable than an animal because Jesus came and died for people. He didn't die for the animals. On a side note, pigs can swim. So when the pigs enter the water, it's the demons that drown them. Now in 14, it says, "And the herdsmen fled and told it to the city and in the country. And the people came to see what had happened. And they came to Jesus and saw the demon-possessed man, the one who had the legion, sitting there, clothed and in his right mind, and they were afraid." You see, they're afraid because Jesus is displaying a level of power that nobody has ever seen. The power level that they've seen from the supernatural world does not compare to what just happened here. You have a man that was demonized that everybody would know, who's broken shackles, broken chains, been exiled to the tombs. Everybody would have known about this guy. And now he's sitting there clothed and in his right mind. And then right next to them is 2,000 head of pigs drowned in the sea. The comparison couldn't be different. And the other thing I want you to see is that the man is clothed. Now you have to ask the question, where did the clothes come from? And here's what I'll tell you. They came from Jesus. Jesus clothed the man. Jesus took off his own outer cloak and gave it to him. Now, how do you know that? Well, this is the example that is given to us all throughout Scripture. Not only does Jesus deliver us from whatever bondage we're in and give us a right mind and provide for us, but he also clothes us in his righteousness. This is a picture of what Jesus does for each and every person who calls themselves a Christian. But of course, on this day, it causes a whole bunch of confusion. And it says, "And those who had seen it described it to them and what had happened to the demon-possessed man and to the pigs. And they began to beg Jesus to depart from their region." You see, the people didn't understand what was taking place. They didn't understand the power that was available to them, and they were wanting Jesus to leave because they're looking at a dead food source, and they're also looking at a man who is just completely changed, and they haven't put two and two together yet. And this is the setup that Jesus uses so that the next time he walks into this land, it's a completely different story. It says next, "And as he was getting into the boat, the man who had been possessed with the demons begged him that he might be with him. And he did not permit him, but said to him, 'Go home to your friends and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you.'" Now, this might seem kind of harsh. I mean, this man is literally begging to be with Jesus. He's saying, "I want to be with you. Just let me get into the boat. I'll do anything you want." But Jesus says no. He says, "I want you to go back into your community, to your friends, and I want you to tell everyone on how much mercy the Lord has had on you." Well, what is that? He wants this man to share his testimony because everybody would have known who this guy was. Everybody would have known the degenerate that this guy was. Everybody would have known that this guy was possessed by a horrific demonic force, and now he's changed. Now he's different. Now he's saying, hey, God has had mercy on me. Well, you know what? That's attractive. Because when you can have a testimony like that and say, I was this way and now I'm that way. Well, how? Well, there's this man named Jesus and he changed me. That is an attractive story for anybody hearing it, because no doubt there were other people dealing with the exact same thing. And the amazing part of the story is this guy actually listens to Jesus. Look at what it says. And he went away and he began to proclaim in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him. And everyone marveled. Everyone marveled. Everyone was blown away at the fact that this guy, who was helpless, who was hopeless, who was living in the tombs in like these ossuary small rooms, and because of what Jesus did, he's a different person. He's a completely different individual. Now, if you fast forward in this story, you see, because Jesus leaves and he goes and he does some other things in another geographical location. But at the end of chapter 6, he actually comes back to this spot. And this is what it says. And when they had crossed over, they came to the land of the Gennesaret and they moored to shore. And when they got out of the boat, the people immediately recognized him and ran about the whole region and began to bring sick people on their beds to wherever he was. And wherever he came, in the villages, cities, or the countryside, they laid the sick in the marketplace and implored him that they might even touch the fringe of his garment. And as many as touched it were made well. You see, what happens in this story is this man who is demonized actually becomes the first missionary. He goes out and he preaches the name of Jesus by showing everybody how much mercy Jesus has had on him. And the story proves out that the people heard, the people listened, and the next time Jesus showed up, people wanted their freedom too. Now, remember I told you that we had asked this former voodoo priest, I said, why did you turn to Jesus? And his answer was astonishing. He said, I had so much money. I had more money than anybody around me. What he didn't have was family or friends. He was alone. People would come to him and want him to do things for them that he could do because of demonic power inside of him. But when he'd do it, he'd get paid his money and then he'd go back inside his house and he would be alone. And then he was under constant attack from the demon itself. The demon tormented him day and night, just like in this story. So he had money, but he didn't have any peace. And finally he said, this is enough. And he went to the pastor of the house that I was staying in, and he repented of his sin. And he turned to Jesus and he said, I need help. And they took all of his magic books, all of his occult paraphernalia, and they broke it and they burned it. And the Holy Spirit entered him and he hasn't been the same since. Now, he no longer has the money that he had, but I tell you what he does have. He has a relationship with people. He has a relationship inside the church with the family of God, and he has peace in his heart. Now, if this is something that you're thinking like, man, this is what I need, this is what I'd encourage you to do. Turn to Jesus. Say, I can give you what I can. In this story, the guy could only run to Jesus, and then it's like the demons took over. But running to Jesus was enough for Jesus to step in and say, I'm going to do the rest. So my hope and my prayer is that you would turn to him and let Jesus do the impossible so that you can finally have peace and be free. Thanks. And I hope this helps.